Growing up, I had a saying. It would ring through the household, pierce the ears of all my family, outright annoy everyone. Mom, I'm bored. And it wasn't because I didn't have anything to do. I had way too many things to do, probably. It was just a reflex. Whenever I stopped whatever it was that I was doing, whenever I lost interest in whatever it was that I was doing, out it would come. Mom, I'm bored. But somehow, through all that boredom, I managed to find interest in something to the point of getting a PhD. Now, the short answer of how I got there is that I found microbial evolution interesting. The long answer is really a meandering path in and out of ecology, evolution, and microbiology. I teach microbiology to hundreds of students every year. This is my native setting. This is a lab setting where I have no more than 24 students. Pretty easy. Very rarely are students saying, Dr. Quides, I'm bored. But if they do, I give them a side eye just like this. I walk over to them. I figure out what's going on. I try to snap them out of their boredom. And that's easy in a one-on-one setting. But for the past 4 winters or so, I migrate to a lecture hall just like this in front of hundreds of students filling up all of these seats. And that's where a split second of, Dr. Quides, I'm bored, can really derail an entire 80-minute lecture. So best practices for 80-minute lectures say that I should lecture for no more than 10 to 12 minutes at a time. In between those 10 to 12-minute intervals, I should introduce some sort of activity. It can be a think, pair, share. It can be some sort of student response system. Whatever it may be, it's supposed to break up the monotony of me just talking up here for 12 minutes at a time. But the issue, as you might imagine, is that for those 10 to 12 minutes, the students in my lecture hall, they have these. They have their phones. What am I supposed to do when they have the world at their fingertips? How am I supposed to say more interesting than 10 60-second videos? A few rounds of a 2 to 3 minute game? Well, if I say the word compound interest or the phrase compound interest, my students probably think of one of two things. Maybe you're kind of on the same lines as them. First one might be some sort of economic compound interest. Maybe they're thinking about their impending student loans and they're starting to freak out because they know that they might be coming. Sorry. Or they're trying to connect compound interest to microbiology. And there is a connection. The answer is that it's related to doubling time. I'm not going to go there. But I'm curious, what about you? How many of you thought about the economic aspect of compound interest? Raise your hand. Most of you. How many of you tried to connect it to microbiology? No one? That's okay. That's okay. I have a third option. How many of you thought about boredom and thought there was maybe a loose connection between boredom and compound interest? Any takers? A couple of you. More than microbiology. So Merriam-Webster defines compound interest as interest computed on the sum of an original principal with an AL and accrued interest. What I'm proposing, at least for today, is that interest is not interest monetarily, but interest is cognitive interest. And it's not principal with an AL, it's going to be principal with an LE. So really what I'm talking about is a scientific principle or a scientific concept. So how am I building interest in some sort of scientific concept? But remember, the challenge is to do this for hundreds of students all at once. So what am I to do? Well, there's plenty of strategies that I could use, but the main thing that I really am trying to do is I'm trying to at least get them in the positive. That's the first part. I need to make sure that the students are interested in my subject from the get-go. The second part is I need to get them to share those ideas. Okay, so how are they going to share those ideas? Well, the great thing about having 100 students or 200 or 300 or maybe even 600, such as in this lecture hall, is that those different students from different diverse backgrounds all have a unique perspective that allows them to share ideas with each other from disparate fields and try to figure out where there might be some sort of commonality in that principle. And as I was saying earlier, I get students that may not necessarily be interested in microbiology. And they say, outwardly, many times, I came into this class not expecting to like it, to which I might side-eye them, like in my previous picture. only for them to finish their statement and then say, but I really enjoyed your class. So at some point along the way during my class, I got them from negative interest to positive interest. But what was it that I did? What many of us instructors are trying to do is we're trying to connect our material to everyday life. In this particular case, I'm going to give you a few examples of how I connect microbiology and the environment to everyday life. But that connection to everyday life needs to be meaningful, and it needs to be meaningful to the students. And one of the best places for me to start when I'm looking for inspiration is to go to pop culture. Now, how many of you have heard of fiber maxing? Quick show of hands. Okay. So for those of you that are not familiar with fiber maxing, it's the general idea that consuming more fiber is going to be good for our gut health. Eating fiber is not necessarily new. We've known that fiber is good for our gut health, but the microbiology behind it, that is what's relatively new. So the short version of it is that if we take good gut health as our applied everyday outcome, how are we going to change the environment to change the microbes to then impact that gut health? Well, what we can do is we can consume fiber. By consuming fiber, we change the environment, which then feeds back on the microbes, and it does so in a beneficial way. Consumption of fiber promotes fermenters. Fermenters are going to have this positive feedback action that's not only going to promote those good fermenters, but it could actually suppress some of the harmful bacteria that can actually do damage to our gut lining. So that's one common example that I like to use. Another one might sound familiar is sourdough bread. How many sourdough bakers are there? A few. This gained a lot of popularity during the pandemic, but the great thing about sourdough starter is that it's really just a microbial community. So if we think about those three connections one more time, we have a microbial community. How can we change the environment in such a way to get a really, really nice crusty piece of bread? How do we get that perfect crumb, that good crust, that good sour flavor? Well, because of the increased popularity in sourdough starter, there have actually been more studies coming out related to sourdough starter and what you can do. You can change the grain that you use. It doesn't just have to be bread flour. You can do some combination of other types of flour. But what that's going to do is it's going to change microbial composition. You can also change where you keep that starter. Keep it in the fridge versus on the bench. Those two environmental changes can drastically change the flavor of your final loaf. Again, another example. Last one is fun, non-alcoholic beer. This is a great example of what happens when you change the microbe, but you keep the environment the same. So if you keep the environment the same, you still have lots and lots of maltose, another set of sugars. That maltose is the primary sugar that gets fermented by yeast. But what if that yeast cannot ferment that maltose? If it cannot ferment that maltose, it's going to produce a lot less alcohol, but it still ferments all those other sugars. So it still produces a lot of the effervescence that we like out of beer, at least beer drinkers. So once again, keep the environment the same, change the microbe ever so slightly, we change the final product. So again, just a few examples that I like to use in my class of how I try to connect microbiology and the environment to everyday life. These are all food examples, but you can imagine some others that might come out of this. But if I haven't convinced you or haven't convinced my students, my hope is that their peers or whoever they're sitting next to can maybe do a little bit of the work for me as well. And this is where I come to part 2, which is really building that interest in a particular principle. And to do this, I turn to activities. Now, you can imagine that it might be hard for students to buy into interacting with their peers in a large classroom setting, especially when they don't necessarily know them, and I get these types of comments. I thought the activity was useless during class, to which I then side-eye, only for them to finish their statement. But I remember the principle because of the in-class activity, which is awesome. So something about that activity reinforced their memory of that particular concept. Whether it was direct or indirect, they were able to expand their connections. And expanding connections doesn't necessarily have to mean their cognitive connections, their connections to other material. It can be their connections, their physical connections with their peers as they're interacting through these activities. So here's an example of one of my favorite types of activities, and that would be generation of these heat maps. So you can imagine a lecture hall just like this. Each of the sections in these heat maps, focus on the top portion for now, is a different section in this lecture hall. The heat map is based on students that have clicked in on their location. When they click in on their location, we can visualize where they are. In this particular example, we were modeling disease spread. At the top, we have a disease prevalence in distinct populations. At the end, we have what happens after that disease has spread because we threw paper airplanes to simulate a vector spread, or we threw paper balls to simulate spreading of a disease. Whatever it may be, that interaction hopefully is building some sort of memory that may be loosely connected to the concept, but something that they can then also fall back on when it comes to crunch time in the exam. And it's not just disease spread where I use these heat maps. I also like to use these to visualize artificial selection, natural selection, doubling time as a callback, or even transfer of electrons. That's one I introduced recently. But whatever it may be, they're interacting with the material in hopefully a more meaningful way. And as they're expanding their connections, their interests continue to build. That's the hope. But how did I get here? How did I get on this stage? How did I get to the point where I'm thinking about microbiology, ecology, evolution, but trying to balance boredom with that as well? I told you it's a long answer, and that's because it's still ongoing. My interest in microbiology, ecology, and evolution comes and goes. And whenever I leave, whenever my interest is lost in those particular subjects, whatever it is that took my interest in the first place, I try to bring back some sort of shared concept from it. Whether that's watching baseball and thinking about how the announcers are delivering on their material, whether it's cooking and all the food examples I've showed you thus far, or maybe it's actually anime and again, thinking about communication to a diverse audience. Whatever it may be, I'm trying to bring back some aspect of whatever took my interest and bring it back to microbiology. And I kind of expect the same thing for my students. I don't expect them to be interested in microbiology for the entire time that they're in my class, whether that's the given lecture or the entire term. They're going to come in with their own unique interests, and that is okay. But for that little bit of time that I do have them, I'm hoping that they're able to take out a little bit of that principle and then apply it to whatever it is they're truly interested in. Because our interests are not linear, and neither is your learning. When I'm teaching with this focus on student interest, I'm really encouraging them to make connections that are meaningful to them. By making connections that are meaningful to them, they're able to engage, hopefully, more deeply, but also gain a sense of pride, what it is that they have learned. Every step along the way, they have a chance to look back. And every chance they have to look back, hopefully, they have a nice little new nugget of knowledge that they're proud to share with those that they love. Because my view is that the accumulation of knowledge, the utilization of knowledge, and the transfer of knowledge is what drives humanity, what keeps us connected to others, even when our interests change. Thank you.